Right, so here we are. This is the start line of the Dragon Ride Gran Fondo. This is undoubtedly going to be the hardest, toughest and the most climbing intensive day in the saddle that I've ever had.
Claxton's up, sound of the Claxton. 3, 2, 1.
Cheeky route recap before we start. 215 kilometers, 3,300 meters of elevation. That's way too much climbing for a 90 kilogram guy like myself. Goals are pretty simple. Firstly, I just want to finish in one piece. Secondly, I would like to finish in the top half. The starts are staggered by the distance you're riding. There's an even longer route that adds an extra 60k. Those mad lads would have left about an hour ago. About 5,000 people are doing the event overall, of which 1,200 are doing the Gran Fondo distance with me. We're released in waves of about 100 people. I lucked out and managed to get to the front of this one. That was definitely a good thing. Coming out of the gate, it's nice not to have to worry so much about riding in a bunch. The first few kilometers are nice and chill, and I just slip in behind these guys here. This is going to be a huge day, so there's no need to worry about going fast at the beginning. A few days before the race, the forecast was actually worrying me. The prediction was that this was going to be the hottest day of the year, and I, for one, really wasn't looking forward to 215 kilometers in 30-degree heat. But luckily, the forecast was wrong. Instead, we have the British classic, overcast and very changeable weather. In total, the route has 8 major climbs. However, that is a great disservice to the real brutality of it. My bike computer said there was a total of 25 climbs. Admittedly, the bike computer would have a different threshold for what constitutes a climb, but any ride with 25 climbs is going to be brutal. The longest ride I've ever done before this was 176 kilometers with only 700 meters of climbing. This ride has almost 5 times that amount of climbing, so it's definitely going to be a huge day. First 16 minutes went by super quickly, and before we knew it, we were off the main road and into the first big ascent of the day. The pace before this was quick. It was mostly downhill on a big dual carriageway, but averaging 32 kilometers an hour with just 140 watts is not bad at all. A very nice start to this long day. The nice start ended very abruptly. Sardis Hill was the first of the major climbs, and on paper it doesn't seem too bad. 1.1k at 6%, but don't let those numbers fool you. The reality is that this was a 15% kicker, which then eases off, followed by another 15% section. There's no spinning easily on gradients this steep. You have to get out the saddle and give it a proper go here. It's not really long enough to settle into a nice climbing rhythm either. This one was a proper shock to the system so early on, but if the legs weren't already awake, they definitely will be after this. Reaching the top, and the fans are there to give you some moral support. Sardis Hill was a very punchy effort. 5 minutes with 308 watts average and 340 normalised. That was a big effort this early on. Following this was a speedy descent through the village of Nice. By this point we were about an hour in and had only covered 25 kilometers, approximately 10% of the way through. There was about 20k to the next climb. This was legitimately the only flat road of the whole day. The rest was either up or down. I was keeping an eye on the distance to the first speed stop. This came at 65 kilometers, so I still had 40k to go. This is a good moment to mention fueling strategy. For a big day out like this, you really need to start fueling from the start, otherwise by the end you'll definitely be paying for it. My plan was to mainly fuel via carb mix. I started the race with 3 750ml bottles, mixed with 90 grams of carbs each. The plan was to drink one of these an hour. I also put an electrolyte tab in each bottle to help avoid cramping up later on. I also had a pocket full of gels, which would be eaten before each climb to give me that extra boost. The rain started to fall, which was quite welcome. I much prefer riding in the rain to the sun. However, it did ruin my camera, so sorry for the poor quality footage here. The flat road was quickly eaten up, and then we were on to the second major climb of the day. This was a longer but more consistent climb. 3.1k at 5%. This climb was a lot easier to settle into a good rhythm than on Sardis Hill. I started the climb behind a big group and saw them right away. However, I know my limits and I wasn't going to chase anyone. My plan on all of the climbs was to stay below my FTP of 310 and be as efficient as possible. No surging, just smooth power till the top. The plan paid off. Soon I was starting to overtake people, and by the time I reached the top I felt great. Climb 2 completed in 13 minutes at an average of 280 watts, right on plan. Next up was a descent with a few kickers and then onto the first feed station. We were 2.5 hours in and I was desperate for a quick stop. To be honest, that was just because I needed to pee. The legs actually felt quite good at this point. The stop was super quick, in and out in less than 5 minutes. However, I had a dilemma with my water. I had drunk 2.5 bottles, which was right on target, but that left me with half a bottle of carb mix. However, the next feed station was 55 kilometers away with 3 major climbs in between. It was by far the hardest section of the ride. I was obviously going to fill my 2 empty bottles, but what to do with the half bottle? I could either keep it as it was or pour it out and refill it with another sachet of carb mix and give myself a third full bottle. In the end, I just kept the half full bottle. In retrospect, I should have just chugged it and then filled it up again so I could have 3 full bottles instead of just 2.5. Right, bottle dilemma over, back onto the road. Only 10k to the base of the Black Mountain. This is when the heavens really decided to open. It absolutely poured for the next quarter of an hour. But reaching the base, it started to clear up, and for the first time, the sun had come out.
Of course the sun comes out as we start climbing.
I know.
Black Mountain was definitely my favourite climb of the day. 5.3k at 6%. The gradient stays consistent the whole way up, making it really easy to just settle into a solid effort. I felt really good on this climb. The peak arrived in a surprisingly quick time of just 21 minutes. Average power of 299. Not bad at all, considering I already had about 1,000 meters of climbing and 70k in the legs. A quick descent followed, but then there was a surprise. The next climb was not classed as a major climb by the organisers, but it definitely was. This bit was a real drag, 3.5% over 8 kilometers, but it was just steep and then leveled off and then steep again. I would say that this uncategorized climb was worse than the Black Mountain. There's no real chance to get into a rhythm, and you're always out the saddle and then sitting again, which really saps your energy. Alright, back onto the official climbs. Next up was the Welch Bryn Duon. I know I'm probably butchering that pronunciation, so I'm just going to call it the Duon from now on. The Duon was another drag, 5.8k at about 4%, but again the gradients weren't that consistent, making it hard to settle in. This was when I was beginning to regret filling up my bottles fully. It was really starting to get warm, and I could have done with more liquid. Halfway up the Duon climb, I reached a point where I'd done over half the climbing. This was a huge mental boost. I could start counting down the remaining climbs. The top of the Duon quickly arrived, partly because I was having a silent battle with this gold bike here. I reached the top in 21 minutes, average power 270. The power was definitely starting to drop off a bit, but nothing too major yet. Now only one climb stood between myself and the next feed station. But first there was a really nice descent. This was great, a nice chance to relax and get the breath back. The Rudo was next. This one is quite small compared to the other climbs of the day, just 3k at 5%. This one passed really quickly, just 12 minutes at 270 watts. But at the top stood the second feed station of the day. This one was really needed. I was parched by this point. I quickly refilled my bottles with carb mix and I was on my way in under 5 minutes. I again decided to go light on the bottles. I decided to only fill up 2 because the next feed station wasn't far away. Only one major climb until the next one. At this point I was 120k in, with already 2,000 meters of climbing in the legs. However, I was well over halfway. Only 3 big climbs left. I was really starting to count them down. The next big one was Penny Fan. I didn't really enjoy this climb much at all. It was on a big main road and there were so many cars passing. I was also really beginning to feel it. Penny Fan was when I started to crack for sure. This was another 20-minute slog, but my power was well down. I only managed 240 watts up this one. What's worse was the descent was absolutely brutal. This bit was super exposed and the headwind was something else. This was supposed to be a chance to rest, but on this 25-minute downhill, I still averaged 210 normalized, which is ridiculous for a downhill. But on the upside, it had now been sunny long enough for my camera to clear up. At the bottom of the descent was feed free. However, I still had a bottle left, so I decided to skip it. There was only the Regos and the descent before feed 4. The Regos was the penultimate climb of the day. The finishing line was in sight. This was when the heat really started. The beginning of the day was torrential rain, and now it was proper summer weather. Regos was definitely the low point of the day for me. I should have stopped at the feed and just downed a load of water. In terms of fueling, I felt okay, but I just needed that extra bit of liquid. Regos was a really nice climb, 5.6k at 5%. The road was fantastic and the gradient was consistent the whole way up, but my legs were definitely done. I dragged my way to the top in 25 minutes. I could only put out 230 watts for this one. The lack of fluid and the temperature were really doing a number on me here. The descent, however, was fantastic. There were really long sweeping corners and no headwind to deal with, which gave me a chance for a proper rest. I managed to reach the bottom and get to the next feed station. With only one climb left, I did 1 bottle of carb mix and 1 bottle of just water. I also swapped out my camera battery, which had finally died. The final climb was here, and it was a big boy. The Welch, 7.9k at 5%. This was a beautiful climb. very exposed, but the scenery was fantastic. At this point, I was just in survival mode. Get to the top, and then it's a long descent back to the finish line. This was a real drag. 33 minutes it took me to get to the top, with an average of 240 watts. That was the last big effort of the day. All that I had to do now was bring it home. There was still a solid amount of distance from the top of the Welch to the finish line, around 30k, of which 15k was a proper descent. The final 15k was pretty much flat along the same dual carriageway that we started on. The descent was fine, but by the time I got to the flat, I was pretty much done. 15k of flat on a normal day is pretty much nothing, but once you've already got 200 kilometers in the legs, it is a drag and a half. However, my prayers were answered, as I shit you not, Wout van Aert and his mate Filippo Ganna came flying past. I made an effort to stick to their wheels and basically just wheel suck them to the finish line. These guys were a massive help. I was pretty much done, and without them it would have taken me so much longer to ride this final 15k. For the flat part, just before the finish, I was doing 260 watts normalised just to stay on their wheel, so a massive shout out to those two who really helped me out there. But now the finish line was in sight, passing through the barriers into the final stretch, and the relief was immense. Until you step off the bike, your body sort of ignores all the pain you're going through, but as soon as you're off, it suddenly comes washing over you and you feel how much aching and pain you're actually in.
Oh, sorry, man. Oh, that was brutal.
Had a bit more in the tank, but...
Yes. Oh.
So what was my final time? In the end, I crossed the line in 9 hours and 38 seconds. Was I a bit annoyed that I didn't get sub 9? Not really, because according to my bike computer, I thought I was at like 9:05, so I wasn't too bothered about that. My average speed, including stops, was 23.8 kilometers an hour, not bad at all. My moving time was 8 hours and 42 minutes with an average speed of just under 25 kilometers an hour. Overall, I was very happy with this result, especially when you consider where I started. Just a few years ago, I looked like this and would not even be able to ride my bike up the smallest of hills. At the beginning, I said my goal was firstly just to finish, and then maybe to finish in the top half. I'll let you know in a bit if I achieve that, but first I want to give a massive shout out to the guys running this event. The people at the Dragon Ride were fantastic. The event was so good, the feed stops were fantastic, there was so much food and everyone was really, really friendly. And if you're thinking about doing a ride like this, I would 100% recommend the Dragon Ride. I will definitely be back next year because I have unfinished business. I plan to come back next year and do the Dragon Devil route, which is 296 kilometers. So stay tuned for that. All right, let's quickly go into some of the stats. Overall, I had an average power of 193 watts or 237 normalized, which to be honest is absolutely insane. At the beginning of the day, my main worry was that in the final few hours, I would just begin to break down, simply because I've never gone this deep in any ride before. On the final few climbs, of course, my power started to decline, but that is to be expected. It just didn't drop down as much as I thought it would. On the first few climbs, I was averaging between 270 to 300 watts. And on the final few, I was doing between 230 and 250, which isn't too bad really considering the sheer length of this ride. I think that low drop off was mainly because I consumed a ridiculous amount of calories. In total, I had 8 bottles of carb water. Each one had 90 grams in it. And I also had 7 gels, each one with 40 grams. Overall, that adds up to a very well-rounded figure of 1,000 grams of carbs, which was a ridiculous amount, but it was definitely worth it. In training, I had been practicing eating this amount of carbs, but my longest rides were only like 3 or 4 hours, so I wasn't sure how my stomach would respond to doing that amount of carbs for double the amount of time. But in the end, I felt absolutely fine, so maybe my real skill is just being able to absorb calories without feeling bad. Anyway, back to it. Did I get top half? In total, 1,141 people finished the Gran Fondo route, so to be in the top half, I would need to finish around position 550th. In the end, I finished in an utterly ridiculous 132nd place, which put me almost into the top 10%, which is utterly crazy. Not bad for a 90 kilogram guy riding an 11 kilogram bike. I know it's not a race as such, but for me, finishing that high up is a huge deal. A few years ago, when I weighed 120 kilograms, I would never even have thought about entering something like this, let alone coming almost in the top 10%. So I think it goes to show that no matter where you start from, you can definitely progress and in the end get pretty good at something. To be honest with you, the finishing place doesn't even really matter. because you should only really be comparing yourself with yourself. As long as you're improving, then I think that's all you can ask for. So if you're sitting there thinking you want to try out a ride like this at some point, start training for it, start working towards it now, and then next year you will be completely unrecognizable to where you were last year. Anyway, that's it from me. Next week, I'll do a video on what my plans are moving forward. I'm probably gonna take like a week off the bike just to get some post-Dragon Ride rest. So if you want to see that, be sure to subscribe, hit the like button, do all those good things, and I will see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.